Welcome back to the Eco-Christian Podcast, where we are exploring what it means to be Christian on planet Earth. I'm Caleb Cray-Haynes. I'm in Nashville, and folks, it snowed big time here last week. I mean, as far as like Nashville snows go. And my kids have been out of school for a long time at this point, so please excuse my lack of sanity. It's actually fascinating because I grew up here, but my kids are getting way more snow days and fun in the snow than I ever did growing up. And the reason for that is not because the climate isn't changing, but actually because the climate is changing. And we're getting these big drops of snow that are happening some in the south because what was a colder and more stable jet stream / polar vortex at the pole is now, imagine like a spinning top that's waffling, right? It looks like it's slowing down and gonna hit the table, right? So imagine like these colder jet streams like that are just dipping further down at different times. Thus the giant snowman in my yard right now. So it's really interesting to see from this bigger sort of climate perspective what's happening with these jet streams and even long-term weather patterns. But to be honest, also my kids did flush ice cubes down the toilet and wore their pajamas inside out in the effort to entice snow. So it could have also been that. So just total disclaimer. So actually, segue, today, friends, we're having a chat with co-executive director of Creation Justice Ministries, Avery Davis Lamb, and Creation Justice Ministries represents the creation care and environmental justice policies of a lot of major Christian denominations throughout the United States, and they work to equip Christians toward restorative practices. So today we are actually sitting down and talking with him about glaciers and watersheds and sacraments and a little bit of resilience in there as well. Low resilience, which will now be my future rapper name. So just throwing that out there. So let's go. Welcome back, my friends. Today, I'm very excited because with me is in the virtual room, Avery Davis Lamb, and he is the co-executive director of Creation Justice Ministries, as you may have heard about. And he actually has a background in both ecological research and faith-based environmental organizing, studying ecology in various ecosystems and organizing faith communities across the country in support of action on environmental justice. So previously, he has worked with Sojourners and Interfaith Power and Light. He holds a Bachelors in Biology and Sustainability from Pepperdine and Masters in Environmental Management in Ecosystem Science and Conservation with a certificate in Community-Based Environmental Management from the Nicholas School of the Environment of Duke University. And just when you think it's over, it's not, because he also has a Master's of Theological Studies with a certificate in Faith, Food, and Environmental Justice from Duke Divinity. So amazing. His research focuses on the role of religious communities in building climate resilience, which I definitely want to get into, and adaptation, with an emphasis on the virtue of climate hospitality. I love that. There's so much goodness in there. Welcome, brother.
Yeah, thanks, Caleb. Happy to be here.
Yes, absolutely. It's the beginning of a new year, and I don't know why. I just got the feels for this year. So I'm glad that I'm able to sort of kick things off with the conversation with you. And I meant to ask, there's something about the name Avery, just sort of rolls off the tongue. What's the history? Do you have is there a etymology there? Do you know where that comes from?
Well, it's a Welsh name. So,
okay.
I don't know what percentage, but at least culturally, my family is very Welsh. Avery Davis. Davis is, I took my wife's last name, actually. So Lamb comes from her side. Davis is my side. So Davis is Welsh. Avery Davis is Welsh. It was a family name, and that it was a last name in our family, and then made a first name. But Avery actually means King of the Elves.
No way.
It's very fitting for my interest in Tolkien and Lord of the Rings as well. So
Yes. Oh, that's so good. Oh, I love that so much. This is like crazy, just warmed my heart. Oh man, that's really. I actually have like our listeners can't see it, but I've got like an elf ear going on in one of my ears, and I always tell the kids that I'm part Keebler. But man, I love that, and I love how you took your wife's last name. Now my wife's gonna hear this, and I think if we could rewind 15 years, like, we would have done something different maybe, but that's very progressive of you.
Yeah, I mean, it made sense for us.
Yeah.
And we could do to, buck the patriarchy in our small
That's
way.
right. Give it the boot. Boot. Awesome. Well, yeah, I'd love to maybe just jump in with a bit of your eco-Christian narrative and story and history, and you can sort of either dive us deep or wherever you want to go, and maybe start with where you grew up and kind of how you got where you are.
Yeah, I'd be glad to. Yeah, and I'll kind of share two stories that have been important to my pathway, my ecological conversion. So I grew up in Topeka, Kansas. I grew up in the church, Southern Baptist Church in Topeka. I was a very churchy kid. I was really good at church, which is probably why I liked it so much. Just a really religious kid. And at the same time, just felt such an innate connection to nature and to creation growing up. Loved being outside, loved working with my mom in the garden, all of that. That was, in retrospect, that was very much my spiritual practice, was being outside, being in the garden. But that wasn't a language that I really had growing up. In my church, didn't really share an understanding of connection with creation or care for creation as a part of Christian witness. So it wasn't, well, I'll pause there and I'll share one story growing up that sort of contributed to my ecological conversion. There was the summer before I entered 7th grade, I spent in southeastern Kansas in a small town called Coffeyville, Kansas, where my aunt lived, where I starred in the local community college summer production of Chronicles of Narnia as Mr. Tighness.
Yeah, you did. That's awesome.
Yeah, it was great. Yeah, some of the pictures are amazing. But anyway, before I got there that summer, what year? I think this was the summer of 2007. There was a 500-year flood in that part of the country. The Neosho River flooded, came way over its banks, and just totally devastated that part of the country. Of course, now we know 500-year floods are way more common. But this one was particularly bad because the primary employer in Coffeyville is a crude oil refinery. And what happened is that some of the workers at the refinery forgot to shut off the valves when the floodwaters came. And so they flooded the refinery, and about 150,000 gallons of crude oil, 150,000 gallons of crude oil spilled out of the refinery into the community. So I was there after the floodwaters had receded, but every day driving through town, you could smell it, or you could smell kind of that freshly laid asphalt oil smell that was just inundating the soil that, impacted, one of the other big employers in that area, which is agriculture, impacted the ability to actually grow crops in the soil that was now poisoned. On, houses, there were oil marks 3 feet high on, these small houses of working class neighborhoods, and X's spray painted on the doors condemning them. Just a total environmental justice catastrophe. And I didn't have the language to think about it in this way then, but I've come to see that as my first experience of a climate disaster. And that moment really shaped the way I relate to the world, not only feeling that connection and love for the beautiful parts of God's creation, but also an understanding of the brokenness in God's creation. As I reflected as well, thinking about the justice elements of this, low income, relatively rural part of the country that was suffering from the impacts of fossil fuels that created, contributed to the crisis of that flooding, that created the crisis of soil poisoning in houses, and that those workers are really, breathing in the fumes every day from the refinery. So that was a really important point in my journey as far as, starting to understand a bit of fallenness as far as our relationship to God's creation. Fast forward about 10 years from then, exactly 10 years ago, this past winter, I just finished my first semester at Pepperdine and went home to Kansas City for a big conference, like 35,000 young evangelicals meeting in the city for, big worship gathering. And I was at a real crisis moment in my faith because at that point, I'd gone through high school, I'd received some more environmental science education, I'd gone through first semester at Pepperdine, which is a beautiful landscape, and I've came to understand the environmental movement, feeling called in some ways to playing my role in the environmental movement. But I looked around at this conference with all of these Christians, and sure, they were talking about some social issues, talking about global poverty, talking about human trafficking, but no one there was talking about the environment. No one was talking about climate change. No one was, even mentioned what I had come to see as the most important issues for Christians to care about at this time. So I sort of had at a moment where I realized, okay, if this is Christianity, then I don't know if this is for me, right? If I have felt all of these close connections with God and nature, and yet the churches that I'm a part of have nothing to say about our connection to God and creation or our role as caretakers, then I'm not sure there's anything here for me.
Yeah.
Really, really struggling with that over the course of the 3 days there. And there's a moment where I felt the movement of God inside me. Maybe I heard the voice of God. I'm not sure. But it was one of those distinct moments where that God is trying to communicate something to you. And, God was saying to me, no, there are people who have come before who, are like you. Look to the scriptures and find everywhere throughout that I'm in creation, that you are to care for creation, right? Find the people who are writing and thinking about this. Find the cloud of witnesses. So I said, okay, I'll do it. And I left there, and I did. I committed to reading the scriptures and finding the places, really resonating with Genesis 2, resonating with Colossians, the Christ Colossians. I found Wendell Berry shortly thereafter, which was a huge transformative moment for me.
So good.
Theologians as well. I just really started this path down for me. It was a saving moment for my faith, but it was also a call moment where I realized, okay, if I'm going to be a Christian, I'm committing myself to this work.
Wow. I love that. And that speaks a lot to your character. It's really cool. Hearing about your story there, connecting, back to the 150,000 gallons of oil, pouring out into a place and a river and a time. And that, I think the temptation sometimes is to hear narratives like that or things like that, and it sounds like, oh, that was a bad accident, as if we're thinking of it like there, this one-time thing that happens, and then it feels as, oh, that was just a one-time thing, and we can forget about it until obviously, and if you're listening to this, you could probably think back just like a year or two and name a couple other ones, right? And then what was that in Ohio, and the train just like not that long ago, and these are recurring. This is we're taking up as humans more and more quote unquote space, and we're human, and so this interaction between us and quote everything else in the natural world, like the layers only getting more thin. And I think right now we're in this time of like figuring out more than ever of what it means to Yeah, no, we thought we knew what we were talking about when we were thinking about sustainability, but as it turns out, it's much more deeper. Anyway, so I think this is a good transition because you've been doing a little traveling, and I recently saw that you had a piece in Sojourners about visiting Glacier National Park, and it's called "Baptized in the Meltwater of a Dying Glacier." Because if you're going to have a title, right, that's so good. So look that up, people. But I wonder if you'd be willing to share some of that story with us with that place and what was that like. And I feel like I remember reading in the article that you kind of named it more of like a pilgrimage. Maybe you could sort of like paint the picture for us of what that was like for you.
Yeah, I'd be glad to. Yeah, well, the trip to Glacier was, the highest highs in terms of coming face to face with some of the most profound beauty in God's creation, and the lowest lows in terms of coming to face with the ways in which our actions are destroying the most beautiful parts of God's creation. And those two were so interwoven throughout my trip in Glacier. The whole time, we're blanketed in smoke. It wasn't thick the whole time, but there was a little haze from the Canadian wildfires that this last summer, were constantly out of control. Wow, a good park, at least a lot of the parts of the park that we were in, where there were fire scars everywhere from wildfires that have happened over the last few years, more frequent wildfires that are happening more often than they should. And then, of course, the glaciers, the namesake of the park that are disappearing. Some predictions say that the glaciers in the park will be entirely gone by 2030. So, pretty soon, the park will have a name that no longer makes sense for what's actually found there. And what a profound loss to lose these priests that have witnessed to 6,000 years, the entire course of the time that is recounted in the Bible, right, is these glaciers have been around. So it was very much a pilgrimage for me to go there and to experience, an embodied experience of what's happening to our world. So one of the most notable glaciers there is Grinnell Glacier. And for a while, it was most notable because it was one of the biggest, and it was also one of the most accessible. It's about a 5-mile hike in, 5-mile hike out. And so that was a pilgrimage that my friends and I who were there together did. We walked in, and we got to the base of what used to be the glacier. There were still some pieces of the glacier up kind of on the mountainside, but it was just this milky blue water. I mean, the water is delicious, honestly. And because it's filled with these minerals, these solid minerals. It's just absolutely captivating. But it's also sad because then you see this dirty patch of snow on the side of the mountain that is the rest of the glacier. So we jumped in because that's what we felt called to do.
That's awesome. Yeah.
We got for it. We got in the water. I don't know how cold it was. I wish I had a thermometer. It was not much above freezing in the water.
What time of the year was this?
This was in August.
This was in August, and it's obviously typically supposed to still be pretty cold there, especially at the altitude in August, I would imagine.
Yeah, the air temperature was pretty warm. I'm not sure if that was typical or atypical. The meltwater temperature was pretty cold. So we got in. We didn't spend long in there. We got out.
Yeah.
And
were there people jumping in at all, or is this? Everyone was like
on the side, but we were the only ones who were crazy enough to get in.
Awesome.
And we did that once, and then I was like, I need to do it again. So I got in, and I kind of sat in there for as long as I could survive. Felt like a minute. It was probably like 10 seconds. Because we didn't originally see this as a ritual. It was us having fun, wanting to experience the world in a fun way. But I got it a second time because I realized how important it was for me to bodily experience this, and, sat on the slab of rock next to the water and started to think about this as a baptism, as, the priest of the glacier baptizing me to, a deeper connection with creation, that baptism as a witness for my love of creation, a witness of the death that's happening there, part of, I suppose part of baptism is recognizing the crucifixion of Jesus, and in that same moment, recognizing the crucifixion of creation and of Christ in creation, and, recommitting myself, baptism as commitment and recommitment to love of the world, to love of the things that are dying, and to this work that I'm called to of protecting and healing creation, and feel accompanied by creation in that it wasn't, the only human element of that baptism was me. I suppose the rest was God and Christ in creation facilitating the baptism. That was so important to me.
Wow. That's like really, I think a powerful narrative and reminder for us. I think wherever we're at, and this sort of like important framing around baptism, I think is particularly, right, as the church, as the people of God, like helpful to sort of grasp at these issues, and what are the ways that this is already intersecting with our faith, right? Because, the temptation, I think, especially in evangelicalism, particularly perhaps over the last several decades, is to sort of like that a lot of what we believe or theology is sort of become unearthed, disembodied, when of course it was never that way. And so, so I'm just thinking more about this intersection between the sacrament of baptism and these kinds of experiences. I think maybe I messaged, or I mentioned in an email or something, I read this book maybe a year or two ago, and it's actually a collection of essays put together by Ched Myers. It's called Watershed Discipleship, and it kind of traces a similar narrative that I found, I think, really helpful. From obviously all the way from these like glaciers to even like the water in Flint, and how we as people of faith have a significant role to play here, theologically, of course, but practically, and both and so, I think it should make us ask more questions as people of faith about what's sort of occurring around us, what our engagement is within it. Our literal watershed. I think often, especially if you're in the city, it doesn't really feel like you're part of a watershed, but you are, and you're sort of dependent on that and with them. And so, so I love that you actually went and got in the water, I guess, because you're able to sort of like place, and what I'm hearing you say, like place your body there, because I think ultimately what we all need to do is sort of allow ourselves to be sort of submerged in the waters around us and all the sort of entangled issues.
Yeah. And, an interesting piece that I found in my research for this, as I was researching and reflecting on my experience, is some really Christian teaching that said baptism should happen in living water. And the way that is understood is water that is moving, water that is alive. And I read that as water that's in creation, right? Go and get baptized in the river if you can find one that's not polluted.
That's right.
And it's true of baptism. It's also true of a lot of the other sacraments, is that these are embodied practices. These aren't just theologies that we hold, but these are place-based embodied practices. And so to the extent that we can situate these in our places and embody them with our own bodies, that's what the teaching is about, right? And also those are the rituals that are going to, build the mindsets, the body sets, and the tools that we need to take on the climate crisis.
Yeah. It may be a little side trail over here, but that really also has me thinking about, again, sort of how sometimes we've been sort of unearthing our sacraments. And there's a big church on the campus down the street from me on the college campus. And, I've done some volunteering there over my college years a long time ago. And anyway, the baptismal, and it's probably pretty similar for probably some other large churches out there maybe, but it's like buried within the stage. And so if you're going to have a baptism, like say whatever Sunday, like sometime before that day, you're going to have like a group of college people come in, move the staging, unquote, like archaeology type situation, bring out the baptism, fill it with water, but even in our small church growing up, it's sort of this thing that's kind of hidden behind this curtain that maybe once a year we sort of pull the curtains back, and then like 12 hours later, it's full of, cold to lukewarm water, and it's, and I'm not like, I was baptized that way. I'm not like saying like, hey, this is like the absolute wrong way to do it. But to your point, like, is it, it's hard to argue, that it's living water. And I think the importance of is quote unquote living water, and the way we're using it right now, is thinking back sort of about this theology of placeness, which I think is so much more critical to our faith than we ever give credit to hardly these days. But in kind of the same way, and we don't have to, this is a whole nother conversation, but kind of the same way with the Eucharist, and this sort of like unrecognizable manna looking wafers with a cross on it, or the everybody knows what I'm talking about, the creakly crackly plastic 2-in-1 McDonald's drive-through. It's like and I know we're not trying to share COVID, but I just see that as a desecration of the Eucharist, right? It's just like you cannot get more from the intention of the Eucharist. Yeah, and exactly. And I think probably for people like us too, it's like we've read all the stuff on like plastic and all that. Like it's like it's really, it is heartbreaking. Yeah, it feels very unearthed, I guess is kind of what I was hearing there. But I was thinking about. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, just a reflection on, when a church decides to start doing baptisms outside, that also calls up a number of questions that are going to require the church to understand its landscape more, right? What watershed are you in? Is the water polluted, right? Can you even do baptisms there? If it is polluted, maybe you should get involved in cleaning that up so that you can do baptisms there, because maybe it's a religious freedom thing, right? That we should be able to be baptized in our local watersheds, right? All of a sudden, all of these watershed discipleship questions become really alive for a church in the way that they aren't if we're not actually engaged. And then the same is true for the Eucharist, right? What is the local agriculture like? Who are the bread bakers locally? Are they able to grow, organically without a lot of pesticides and fertilizers, without polluting? All of these, once you start earthing,
that's right.
You start connecting, reweaving these threads of connection with the local creation and local community in ways that our churches really should.
That's right. You heard it here, folks. Earth your sacraments the way God intended. So yeah, absolutely. I think we frequently miss too. I was thinking about like Jesus was a person, obviously, who spent his entire life within a particular watershed. And I'm not sure that we completely realize that, even for Jesus and his baptism, right, there were these environmental, social, political, theological implications for Jesus to be baptized, even into the Jordan of his day. And so, so Jesus, the incarnation, teaches us about this placeness. But we even miss, I think, sometimes that the Jordan and this sort of land around the Sea of Galilee was was really groaning under Roman imperialism. Right, sort of the empire was very busy colonizing and industrializing these waters. And so, yeah, anyway, I guess so back to, similar to how these glaciers are sort of groaning, we could say, under the privatization or the abuse of fossil fuels, et cetera, and so I guess I wonder how you see the role of faith communities, and what do you think, kind of get into more of the grit here, if we can, of what do you think it looks like for us sort of in the wake of these sort of environmental exploitations happening maybe around where we live and where we worship as faith communities, to submerge ourselves more.
Yeah. I do think that the first step for this is falling in love with your place. It can start with earthing the sacraments. It can start with just creating space for connection to creation. One of the very few silver linings of COVID is that more churches were meeting outside and saw that as a possibility. Just understanding creation and our watershed as an extension of the church. The walls of the church I was taught this growing up. The walls of the church don't end at the walls of the church, right? The church is the community. And, that includes the community of creation. And so falling in love, means that you're going to look more closely at creation. And in order to love a place, we have to know a place. And in order to heal a place, we have to both know and love that place. So learning about the issues, in our watershed, so many of our waterways are polluted. And I'll even speak for myself. I don't know all of the waterways in my watershed here around Durham that are polluted. I don't know the extent to which they are polluted. I don't know which ones are safe to swim in and which ones aren't. So learning those things and falling in love with them means that we're going to be inclined to work to protect them. And, the good thing is that there are a lot of faithful people out there who are currently working to protect them. And so building partnerships, building collaborations with them, finding volunteer work days with the local watershed association is such a fun way to do that.
Yeah.
There's some communities for whom, policy advocacy is going to be important. And that's getting at what you were saying with, the empire of, American consumerism, all the policy issues that are facing us, the deregulation of pollution that is, polluting our waterways. Understanding the issues is going to equip us to ask our lawmakers to be better, right? To ask them, to demand for them, really, to protect these places, right? So I think for any community, there's a place to plug in. Maybe it starts at working these in with the rituals that we're doing. Maybe you're ready to do policy advocacy, and that's awesome. I would love for every community to end up there.
I think those are really great points. It made me think too, I was thinking about the watershed, the Mill Creek Watershed Association, which is around where I live, and engaging there. And it's like, a quick Google gets you connected with a lot of places. But I was also thinking about the unique juxtaposition that I think a lot of churches are in, because I know, and I know you've worked for Interfaith Power and Light and whatnot, like in, a lot of these either watershed associations or Interfaith Power and Light or whatever it is, like they're kind of looking for more partner churches, more hub sites, more places to have their meetings, or, and definitely just more involvement from their local churches. And it's just such a no-brainer, easy next step to connect with your community and obviously the community of creation around you. So that's really good. I love to kind of turn a corner here a little bit. I don't know how long we've been going, but I know that you do a lot of work around resilience, and obviously your research around the role of religious communities in building climate resilience and adaptation. I wonder if you would talk for a minute about resilience and about that. And I know I know that's a word that's sort of tossed around, but maybe not, maybe not understood very well sometimes around what that means for us, particularly as faith communities. So anyway, I wonder if you'd maybe jump in that for a minute and describe resilience and why that is something for us to focus on as people of God.
Yeah. Oh, I would love to. Yeah. I'll start with the kind of the guiding question for me in this work, which is just how can our communities of faith be hubs of resilience, helping our communities weather the physical, social, and spiritual storms of the climate crisis. So recognizing that we are uniquely situated as people of faith, as congregations and communities, to address the crises on all those levels, right? We have the physical, social, and spiritual assets to bring to bear to help folks make it through all of the storms that we're facing right now. So you're right, resilience. Oh, it's such a sexy word right now. Everyone loves to talk about resilience, but what the heck is it? The way that I define resilience is that resilience is climate mitigation plus climate adaptation plus deep democracy. And this is not my own definition. This is one that comes from a report called Pathways to Resilience from the Kresge Foundation. And what they mean by that is that resilience isn't just bouncing back. Right? I think often we hear resilience and, it's like people saying to folks who are going through disasters, oh, you're so resilient. Or, folks who are marginalized, oh, you just bounce back so easily, right? That doesn't really get at the root issues that we need to address. And so that's why mitigation is important. To have a resilient world, we need to prevent as much warming as we physically can. And so that means cutting emissions drastically and immediately. Climate mitigation. Adaptation is creating changes in communities, both physical and social, so the communities are able to weather the impacts that we know are coming. And then democracy or deep democracy is what the Kresge Foundation report calls it, is addressing those systemic issues that are preventing us from making the changes that we need to have. So, barriers to voting, barriers to civic participation, threats to democracy that we're seeing, all of these are so intimately and deeply related to climate change because the folks who are being shut out from our democracy are precisely those folks who are most deeply impacted by climate change. And so if we're going to have any hope of addressing the crisis, we need to figure out a way to make sure that all of these people of God, have a way to participate in our democracy.
It's really good. Wow. You got that down, bro. Yeah.
Yeah. Years of talking about resilience.
Yeah. That's really that is really helpful to talk about because it's grabbing that change that has to occur. I like how you said it's not about bouncing back necessarily, but it's about there's a transformation aspect.
Something forward. Often I will say it's not bouncing back; it's bouncing forward into beloved community, right? Into the world we want to inhabit.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I think we're gonna have to do a 2.0 on that. Yeah. Well, before we kind of like tie a bow on anything, I want our listeners to hear more about CJM, Creation Justice Ministries, which is where you're the co-exec with Karen. And I know she's awesome, and you guys have a wonderful mission there. Tell us about Creation Justice Ministries and what programs you guys are up to, and what resources are available for people to connect with you.
Yeah, I'd be glad to. Yeah, our mission is really three parts. It's to educate, equip, and mobilize Christians to better care and love for God's creation. So for education, we create and release a lot of resources that are both theological education, but also policy education. We do our best to combine the two. So a little sneak peek, we have an Earth Day Sunday resource coming out later in January. Not gonna release the theme just yet, but you can find out soon. That does combine those two. And so a lot of these resources provide, there's liturgies, there's prayers, there's songs, there's sermon starters for folks who preach. We try to make it really accessible and helpful for folks who are planning research, for clergy, and for lay leaders who are interested and need resources to talk about creation, from the pulpit or in adult education, wherever it is. So we have a whole archive of these resources as well on our website, creationjustice.org/resources, as our resource hub. And we have a whole slate of different kinds of resources there. So that's educate, equip. Part of this is helping folks get the training that they need to talk about creation justice and climate change. And so we have a few programs where we do this. We have kind of ongoing webinar series that you can find on our website and through our email newsletter. We also host regional clergy trainings occasionally. So this year we have a few coming up. We have one in Georgia at the end of this month. We have one in Maine over the summer, and then one in North Carolina also over the summer. So if you're in any of those areas, hit us up for those.
Yeah. What does like one of those entail? Cliff notes.
Yeah, sure thing. Yeah. What we like to do for these is bring together scientists, theologians, and ministry leaders to be in conversation with each other. So we want it to be a transformational retreat instead of a transactional one. So we're not just kind of up there presenting information, but it's about these leaders being in conversation with each other, engaging in dialogue, building connections and relationships with each other, and really learning together. And especially having the scientists there is really fun because the scientists learn from the theologians, the scientists learn from the ministry leaders. Everyone learns from everyone. So a good opportunity to kind of deepen interest, and knowledge about creation justice issues, but also and they're always regional. The people there, including the scientists, are always from that region. So to deepen relationships and build social networks with the folks who are in your neighborhood.
That's what's up. That's great, man. Awesome. Well, I think people connecting with Creation Justice Ministries is a great way for folks to kick off their new year here in 2024, and stay tuned for obviously more resources from them this spring, particularly their Earth Day Sunday resource. I'm also excited about. So that's wonderful. So, man, Avery, thanks for all you do for the kingdom, brother.
Yeah, thanks, Caleb. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, this has been a wonderful conversation, and we're gonna put some things in the show notes. I want to link, especially your article, and obviously maybe some of the books that we've mentioned, and Creation Justice Ministries. So I'm looking forward to connecting soon.
I hope that this has been fruitful for you. Consider how can your congregation engage sacramentally with the earth? We want to hear from you. We want to hear what you're thinking about the podcast. We want to hear stories. We want to talk with you. So email us at ecochristianpodcast@gmail.com. Follow us on social media. There's links in the show notes. And y'all, we're a baby podcast, and we need your help to lift up and pass along these hopeful and needed conversations in the church. So leave us a review on your chosen platform and share this with your church people. All right, y'all. Grace and peace.